Before we begin, a quick favor. If you've been enjoying the podcast, would you consider leaving a review? It really helps others find this space and join us on their own healing journey. If you haven't already, you can get your free IFS meditations at exploreifs.com. Welcome back to IFS Meditations and Insights. I'm Tim Fortescue, your guide on this journey toward wholeness through the lens of internal family systems. Together, we're creating a sacred space to explore, accept, and love all parts of ourselves. As we do this work, we open ourselves to experiencing divine love and living more authentically. Let's begin. Well, let me start at the beginning. I'm Tim Fortescue. I'm an IFS practitioner, a coach, and the founder of Faithfully Growing. And for the next year, I'm going to do something I have never done before. I'm going to read you my memoir. And if you'd like to be added to the wait list, the book when it comes out, you can sign up at exploreifs.com/unburdened. The book is called Unburdened, a memoir in parts. It is the story of a boy who grew up in government housing in South Carolina, learned to read rooms before he could read books, and spent decades building a meaningful life from places inside that were too burdened to rest. It moves from the Blue Ridge foothills to California, from seminary to cross-cultural work among Afghan immigrants, from meeting the woman who would become my wife, to fatherhood, marriage, distance, shutdown, and the slow discovery of internal family systems, which gave me language for what I had lived without language for years. It's not a therapy manual. It's not a triumphant before and after. It is a story about the parts of us that work so hard to help and what becomes possible when we finally stop asking them to carry everything alone. Here's how this series works. Every 3 weeks, you will get 3 connected episodes. First, I will read you a chapter of the memoir. The following week, I will share an IFS insight that draws out the theme of that chapter. In the third week, I will offer a guided meditation that helps you be with whatever that chapter stirred. You do not need to know anything about IFS to listen. I encourage you to share this with others who you think may want to hear it. You don't need to be in therapy. You just need to be someone who has carried something for a long time and wonders what it would feel like to set it down. This first episode begins with the prologue and then moves into chapter 1, the living room. Let's begin. Prologue. There are some stories you tell while you are still inside them. Not because everything has resolved, not because the meaning is settled, but because something in you has finally become quiet enough, or brave enough, or tired enough of hiding to speak. I'm writing this from a sunroom in the corner of a house in Wisconsin. Outside, the woods are quiet. The dog is asleep on the couch. My children are somewhere in the house, moving through their own ordinary lives. And I am here, in this bright corner, trying to tell the truth about a life that began in government housing in South Carolina and has traveled through grace and through grief to this room where I sit now. I do not know exactly when I decided to write this book. Maybe it was not one decision, but many small ones. A morning when a memory arrived so clearly it demanded to be written down. A session with a client where my story rose underneath theirs. A night when I could not sleep and realized I'd been carrying something for decades that wanted to be said out loud. This is one of those stories. For a long time, I thought a life could be told by sequence. First, this happened, then that, then another thing. A timeline sturdy enough to make a person legible. But that is not how a life is actually carried. A life is carried in rooms, in bodies, in tones of voice, in the weather of a home, in what is said and what is never said, in the loves that formed you and the burdens that bent you, in the younger selves who are still somehow present, in the ancestors whose sorrows and strengths traveled farther than they knew, in the ordinary moments that seemed small at the time, but later turned out to be doorways. That is the world this memoir comes from. Not a world of perfect memory, a world of living memory. The kind that lingers in the nervous system, in the imagination, in prayer, in shame, in longing, and in the strange tenderness of looking back and realizing that parts of you have been carrying the past for a very long time. I've come to believe that a person is never only one age. Some younger part is often still in the room, still listening, still bracing, still hoping, still trying to understand what happened and what it meant. And sometimes healing begins not when the past is solved, but when someone finally turns back with enough honesty and gentleness to say, I remember you. I did not know how to come sooner, but I am here now. This book rises from that turning. It rises from childhood in South Carolina, from government housing, in church fellowship halls, and open doors, and complicated silences. It rises from mountains in the distance, and from the widening that called me west. It rises from California, and cross-cultural work, and love and marriage, and parenting, and the slow, painful discovery that a person can build a meaningful life and still be living from places inside that are too burdened to rest. It rises too from faith, not tidy faith, not certainty pretending to be peace, but the kind of faith that keeps reaching toward love, even while fear is still in the room. The kind that keeps asking whether God might be gentler than the voices many of us learned to trust. The kind that slowly begins to believe that healing is not a betrayal of devotion, but one of its deepest expressions. And it rises from internal family systems. Though this is not a book of theory, IFS gave me language for what I had already lived for years without language. That I am made up of parts, that those parts have been trying to help me, and that even the ones that have caused pain make more sense when met with curiosity than when met with contempt. IFS did not give me a new life from nowhere. It gave me a way to become more honest about the life I was already carrying. So, this memoir is not the story of an innocent self finally ruined or a broken self finally repaired. It is the story of a beloved human being learning, slowly and unevenly, that nothing inside him was beyond the reach of compassion. It is the story of burdens mistaken for identity, of protectors mistaken for the whole self, of love that kept arriving anyway, of a life widened by sorrow, community, faith, family, and the long work of becoming more able to stay present. I do not offer these pages as a final accounting. I offer them as witness to the child I was, to the people who made me and marked me, to the parts of me that worked so hard to help, to the loves that held, to the losses that shaped me, to the God who, even when I could not feel it clearly, kept meeting me with more mercy than fear. And maybe underneath all of that, I offer them as a kind of consent. Consent to this actual life, not the polished version, not the defended version, not the version scrubbed clean of contradiction. This one, the one with tenderness and pressure, the one with silence and widening, the one with burdens that took a long time to name, the one where loving people and being loved, loving God and learning to love myself did not come easily together. The one that still, somehow, has become a place of grace. If you are listening to this, I hope you will receive it in that spirit, not as an argument, not as a performance, but as an honest attempt to stay close to what is true and to say as plainly as I can that even in the places where a life has been burdened, complicated, or hidden from itself, there is still something holy in the telling. Chapter 1, The Living Room. I didn't have language for it back then. I just knew something in me was always working, even when I was still, even when I was supposed to be resting or laughing or just being a kid. There was a quiet hum underneath everything. It was as if a part of me was always scanning, always adjusting, always trying to make sure things didn't go sideways. I would not have called it anxiety. I would not have called it protection. I would not have called it anything. It was just how I was, or at least how I thought I was. I grew up in government housing in a duplex where life often felt close in every sense of the word. Close walls, close moods, close disappointments, close expectations. The living room was the center of that world. It was where people gathered, where tone mattered, where silence could say as much as speech, where the atmosphere in the room could shift before anyone named why. The duplex on Clay Circle, that is where it begins. A small brick building with a shared wall in a yard that was barely a yard. Inside, the rooms were close enough that life felt shared, whether you wanted it to or not. The television, the argument, the silence after the argument, the sound of someone deciding not to say what they were thinking. My older sisters were mostly gone by then, old enough to have lives of their own, which meant it was often just my mom, who I called Ma, and me inside that closeness. There was one place I could go, the bathroom. My family still laughs about this today. Me at 12 or 13, rolling rubber balls around in the bathtub to pass the time. Sometimes two or three of them at once. Watching them arc along the porcelain and collide. Just sitting there, not bathing, not doing anything useful. Just rolling balls in the tub with the door locked, getting some solitude, getting my mind off things. That small porcelain space became my first practice of self regulation, though I would never have called it that. I just knew I needed somewhere the atmosphere could not reach me, even if it was only a bathtub and a few rubber balls. I remember the couch, brown, worn on the armrests. That is where I sat when the living room was doing its work on me. That is where I learned to be still while my insides moved fast. The floors were cold cement. The walls were solid enough, but the place was small, even at 3 bedrooms. Everything about it asked you to be close, whether you were ready for closeness or not. But it was home, and it held love too. That matters. It was not only a place of pressure, it was also a place where Granny Betty's friends picked me up for church, where my dad brought chocolate Easter bunnies at Easter, where my mom, for all her own struggles, kept the house standing. The closeness was not only threat, it was also the particular intimacy of people who have no choice but to be near each other, and who sometimes, in the best moments, make that nearness feel like belonging. I learned that early, not as an idea, as a bodily fact. I grew up in a place where you learned what mattered and what did not. You learned what got attention, what kept the peace, what brought approval, and what stirred things up in ways you did not want. Some of those lessons were spoken, most of them were not. They lived in tone, in pauses, in what people reacted to, and what they ignored, in the way a room could tilt without anybody admitting it had moved. And somewhere along the way, the vigilant part of me got very good at reading all of that, at adjusting, at staying just inside the lines. Before the duplex, there was the trailer. We lived there from the time I was about 5 until I was 11. It sat on a hill, which meant there was space underneath, especially at the far end where the ground fell away. That became one of my earliest refuges. I would crawl under there with my toys, He-Man and the castle, Skeletor, the tigers he rode, and play alone in the cool shade beneath the house. No one asked anything of me down there. No atmosphere followed me. I could breathe in a way the rooms above did not always allow. I had other escapes too. In the backyard, sheets hung on the clothesline, and I would play Sesame Street live behind them, performing for no one, disappearing into imagination and freedom. And inside, underneath the trailer, I kept jars of pickle juice, pickling things as science experiments, watching what happened to ketchup packets, and whatever else I could find. These were not dramatic acts of rebellion or withdrawal. They were a child finding instinctively the small spaces where he could be something other than watchful, where play was possible, where the self could be strange and curious and free without managing anyone else's mood. I remember my mom's country dance hall. She would take me with her, and looking back, I understand it was her social outlet, her escape, the place where she could have some enjoyment in a life that did not offer much of it elsewhere. For me, it was sometimes fun, but not generally. I didn't have much choice or agency then. I went because she went. It was a non alcohol venue, which makes one memory sharper than it might otherwise be. I was 8, maybe 10. She got caught drinking beer in the bathroom stall, a red solo cup, and we were escorted out. I remember the embarrassment of it, the way it felt to be seen leaving, the way something in me tightened around the event and filed it away without anyone ever naming what had happened or what it meant. And there was the broom dance. The way it worked, everyone on the floor had a partner except one person who danced holding a broom. When they decided to, they would throw the broom down on the cement floor, and it would make a loud clack, and everyone would scramble for a new partner. The last person without one picked up the broom for the next round. The women would try to get me to dance with them, these older ladies reaching for a little boy who did not want to be reached for. I remember the awkwardness of it, trying to be invisible, the feeling of being pulled into something I had not chosen and could not easily escape. Those scenes carry something true about the whole atmosphere of my childhood. So much happened that I did not fully understand. So much carried an undertone of adult worlds I was brought into without explanation. And the child who lived inside that atmosphere learned naturally and without anyone teaching him directly to watch, notice, to figure out what was happening without asking too many questions, because asking questions could make things worse. I have a memory that comes back sometimes. I'm not sure how old I was. It might have been in the trailer, or maybe even earlier. Young enough, I think, that my feet did not quite touch the floor when I sat in a chair. Old enough to know when something was off. I cannot tell you what happens in it, not because I am protecting it, but because it does not arrive as a story, it arrives as a feeling, a thickness in the room, a shift in the air that my body recognized before my mind could name. Something was wrong, and I knew it, and I did not move. That is all. That is the whole memory. A child sitting still inside something he could not fix and did not yet have words for. But there are other memories that do arrive as story. My parents arguing, my father's voice filling the room in a way that left no space for anything else. And sometimes it was not only his voice, sometimes it was his body too. I remember him flipping furniture, the crash of it, the way the room rearranged itself in an instant around his anger. People used to say my mom was the only woman who would stand up to my dad, called him daddy. They said it like it was a compliment, like it was strength. Maybe it was. But for the child sitting in that room, it did not feel like strength. It felt like two forces colliding, and me somewhere in between, trying to become small enough that the collision would not reach me. That was hard to live with, not because either of them was trying to harm me, but because a child's nervous system does not make fine distinctions about intention. It only knows this is not safe. Be still. Do not draw attention. Wait for it to pass. There are things I cannot remember but have been told. My sisters saying that my grandma used to sing a lullaby. Go to sleep, little baby, before the boogeyman gets you. And when you wake, you can have a piece of cake and ride your pretty little pony. Love and threat, braided together in a grandmother's voice. Comfort, offered in the same breath as warning. I was surprised when my sisters told me this. It did not match the grandmother I knew, the one who adored me, who cared for me, who probably never even thought about the words she was singing. But I wonder how much of what shaped me happened before I could hold memory at all, before age 3 or 4, before language, before I could name what the atmosphere was doing to me. I believe many of my parts took their places that early, and that the exile that many of them believe that they're still protecting lives or lived somewhere in those years I cannot reach in memory alone. I remember sitting in the living room watching the adults. Nothing big was happening, no yelling, no obvious conflict, but something was wrong. The kind of wrong you feel in your body before your mind can explain it. And I remember a subtle shift inside me, a tightening, a kind of leaning forward without moving, like something in me was saying, pay attention. And not only pay attention, figure this out. Make sure you're okay. Make sure everyone else is okay too. But before the tightening, there was something else, something quieter, something that was simply present, noticing, aware, not yet scanning, not yet adjusting, just there. That was me before the protector stepped forward. Just a child, present in a room, aware of what was happening without yet needing to fix it. And then the world asked something of that presence, and parts rose to answer. I did not know it then, but I can see now that one of my early protectors was already taking its place. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, doing what it believed it had to do. For a long time, I thought that part was simply me, the one who noticed, the one who read the room, the one who stayed a step ahead of things, the one who did not want to cause problems, the one who tried to settle them when they came. I remember a specific way this showed up when my parents argued, or when the atmosphere shifted in the way it could without anyone naming it. I would do something with my body. I would get smaller, not physically hiding exactly, more like reducing, taking up less space, making my breathing quieter, pulling my elbows in, becoming less noticeable, as if some part of me believed that the less visible I was, the less likely the trouble would reach me. And alongside that shrinking, there was another move I learned. Going away, if something was tense, I could leave. I would go outside to be with myself, or under the trailer where the underpinnings were. Room enough for a boy and his toys, and the particular mercy of being somewhere the atmosphere could not follow. I would play there alone, in the cool shade underneath the house, and something in me could breathe again. That was my first strategy. Not fixing things, but leaving them. Not making the room better, but finding a different room, or no room at all. Just the ground under the trailer, the toys in my hands, the sheets on the clothesline, and the quiet of being somewhere no one was asking anything of me. Looking back now, I can see how much intelligence was in that adaptation. It was not weakness, it was a young system reading danger and finding the most creative response available to it. In some ways, it was a gift. I became grounded, steady, present in a way that many people never learned to be. But steadiness, purchased through shutdown, is not the same thing as peace. The groundedness was real, but so was the cost. I learned to hold still at the experience of feeling. I learned to be present in a room while being absent from myself. The wounds of shutting down kept me from being more expressive, more expansive, more willing to let my feelings move through me rather than around me. I could read every current in the room. I just could not feel my own. Because the child who learns to stay small, to stay safe, does not easily learn to take up space later. And the child who learns that helplessness keeps the peace does not easily learn to need things for themselves. It looked like responsibility, it looked like maturity. Sometimes it even looked like strength. And in many ways it was, but it was also costly because when one part of you is always working, other parts do not always get much room to breathe. There were parts of me that felt more deeply, parts that needed comfort, parts that did not want to be the responsible one, parts that did not want to figure everything out, parts that wanted more room than the living room, more ease than the atmosphere around me seemed to allow. They were not gone, they were simply further back, waiting. I did not know how to listen to them yet. I did not even know they were there. I only knew that something in me was always busy, always tracking, always adjusting, always learning how to stay acceptable, safe enough, and legible inside the world I'd been given. And underneath that, there was fear, not always loud, not always overwhelming, but present. The fear of getting it wrong, the fear of being too much, the fear of not being enough, the fear that something might fall apart and that I would somehow be left inside it without a way to steady myself. So the protector kept working, kept noticing, kept learning, kept getting better at its job. And because it got better at its job, I became someone people could count on, someone who could read a room, someone who knew how to adjust and respond, someone who learned early that survival often had less to do with force than with sensitivity. I became the kid adults trusted. Teachers liked me. Church leaders noticed me. I was put in charge of things before I was old enough to know what being in charge really meant. I sang solos. I led prayers. I was given microphones and platforms long before I had a self steady enough to know what to do with them. And I performed, not falsely exactly, but with a kind of readiness that came from knowing deep down that being good at things was one of the surest ways to stay safe. I remember pretending to be a televangelist on my Aunt Betty Mae's porch. I had a double cassette recorder and I would preach into it, rewind, play it again, preach again. My voice had not changed yet. The adults thought it was adorable, and it was, in a way. But looking back, I can see something else in that boy too. He was practicing, practicing how to hold attention, practicing how to sound important, practicing how to be the kind of person people would listen to. Because being listened to felt like the closest thing to being safe. But sensitivity without freedom has a cost. Cost builds quietly. It shows up in the body first, in the mind next, in the life after that. Looking back, I do not think the living room mattered because it was dramatic. It mattered because it was formative. It was one of the first places my inner world began organizing itself around atmosphere, around vigilance, around the quiet work of staying in right relationship with whatever the room required. That is where some of my earliest parts began to take on their roles. Not because anything inside me was bad, but because something inside me was trying to help. I did not know that then. I only knew that something in me was always working, and that for a long time felt like the same thing as being alive. But it was not me. It was never the whole of me. Beneath the vigilance, beneath the scanning and the adjusting, and the quiet fear, there was something that never left, something that watched without grasping, something that could be present without needing to fix. I know now that this was self, the part of me that is not a part at all. It was always there, in the living room, under the trailer, in the bathtub with the rubber balls. It did not leave when the protector stepped forward. It only got quieter, harder to hear beneath the weight of what my parts were carrying. The burdens clouded it. They never extinguished it. That's chapter 1. I want to say one thing before we close. The part of me that scanned every room for danger as a child is still with me. It has not disappeared, but I relate to it differently now. I know its name, I know its reasons, and I no longer confuse it with the whole of who I am. What I know now, what this whole memoir is about, is that self was always there, even in the living room, even when the burdens were thickest. It was never extinguished, just clouded. And the work of unburdening is the slow, gentle clearing of those clouds. So next week, I'll share an IFS insight about how protectors like that one form in childhood and what it means to finally turn toward them. And know too that if you want to be on the wait list for the actual book, you can sign up at exploreifs.com/unburdened. That wraps up another episode of IFS Meditations and Insights. If today's episode was meaningful to you, please follow, subscribe, and share with someone who might need it. A positive review helps more people find this healing work. And don't forget, you can get your free IFS meditations and the self-led pause starter kit at exploreifs.com. And until our next session, be gentle with yourself. I'll try to do the same because we're beloved.